By the early 80s, I'd spent a few years doing music videos in London for bands that were coming through, like The Jam and Adam and the Ants, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. Interesting visual and, new wave sounds that were coming out, and we were doing as much as we could, kind of conceptual videos or story videos. We didn't quite know what it was yet because MTV hadn't come along. Then suddenly MTV opened up in the States, and the demand was much more there from the record companies for us to do our best work, and therefore we got a slightly bigger budget. We started forming more of an idea of what people were looking for, or what would be interesting. Didn't seem to be any ground rules for what was a video at that point. I think music videos in the 80s probably made movies a bit quicker cut in terms of editing, because everything, or a lot of it, became about the pace and the adrenaline of the way the audience would see something or appreciate something. So it felt like things were speeding up, things were getting faster, things were more immediate, things were looking for more impact. And I think that probably fed back into movies. Even when I was doing music videos in the late 70s, I didn't think about directing movies, even though I'd been a camera assistant, I'd been a clapper-loader, so I'd been on the set a lot. I really still didn't fully understand what the director's role really was. I mean, what the full scope of it was. I knew what the bit I saw on the set was about. I just didn't know the full thing. So it wasn't an ambition I had to be a movie director. Kind of fell into it. I was quite young, and these videos were getting more and more attention, and suddenly I was getting offered scripts from Hollywood. I crossed paths with Rusty through my mother Zelda, and she was in the business. At that time she was doing continuity, which is script supervising. She later became a director. In fact, she directed her first movie at the same time as I did Electric Dreams, my first movie. And we got in the Guinness Book of Records for that. Hadn't happened with a mother-son before. In the early 80s, she was working on a film called Yentl with Barbra Streisand. And Rusty was working as a producer on Yentl. He was watching some of the videos that I was doing, and he said to my mum, would Steve be interested in doing a movie? I've written this movie that's it's music based, and it's about future technology, and it just seems like what he's doing in music videos. In particular, he'd seen the Michael Jackson Billie Jean, and he said it should be a natural to do it. And at the time he hadn't raised the money for it, but he sent it to me, and I thought this sounds really great, and it sounds like a real fun thing to do, and that would be amazing to do it. The conceit of the triangle between the boy, the girl and the computer, the Cyrano de Bergerac bass that Rusty had used for the concept was really a good idea, and it felt like it was doing what we were trying to do in music videos, which was kind of drive through a new cutting-edge world of attention and production, and that felt like it fit right in to go and then do this movie about a desktop computer, because they were going to be the future. You knew they were. They weren't at the time, hardly anyone I knew had one, but you felt people were going to get these things. They were going to start linking up, place, and obviously that's all going on now. Funnily enough, some of the things took many years, and some of them were instantly available.
Hello?
Hello. Hello. Hello.
You're talking?
Richard was a friend of my sister, who was in a relationship with his cousin, and so I got to know Richard quite early, kind of going on holiday with him and going to Menorca and playing tennis and mucking about. So on a personal level, I saw the early Richard and knew him quite well. And so as soon as I read it, I said to Rusty, I should send this to Richard, because I think he would like this, and the music part of it. So we went up to his barge, over to his boat, and we sat there, and Richard was thumbing through the script as he was chatting to us, and he said, "Yeah, I've read it. Yeah." He said, I think we could do this." And within 12 weeks, we were filming it. It was like one of those rare things. I thought this is what always happens, because it was my first time kind of trying to get the finance to get the movie. And Richard was always amazing and cavalier. If he saw something that he thought would work, he'd just say yes, and then he'd figure out how to do it later. And the budget that Rusty brought in his friend Larry DeWay to budget it, and it came up to $7 million, which is quite a bit. Not top of the range Hollywood, but it's quite a bit for an English production. But Richard wasn't fazed by that at all, and in fact he then rang up MGM the following week, I think, and said, I've got this movie, we're going to do music, I've got Human League and all these people that can do it. And I think they gave him $6 million, like immediately over the phone as an offer. So he got all his money back as an advance before he'd, even started in the way that he does. And he didn't even know that was how you were supposed to do it, I don't think, but it was just the way it worked. Yeah, Virginia Madsen walked in, did an audition for us for the part, and she just seemed so genuinely warmed and beautiful and just innocent and natural. She was just the one when she came in. It just seemed right. And then for the boy, we looked around quite a bit. Rusty was very keen on Lenny Von Dohlen, and I went to see a couple of films he was in, and he's striking on the screen. I mean, I don't know, it might be urban myth, but somebody told me in recent years, actually it was one of the people from MGM, that Tom Hanks had come in read for it, wanted to do it. But for some reason it never got to me. But that might have been another story.
You never asked me my name.
Well, what is it?
Edgar.
Yeah, Bud Cort was Rusty's idea. He was a massive fan of Harold and Maude, the movie, and when he played me his voice, I thought he was absolutely right. Rusty was dead right. It was like a great voice, and obviously because it was my first movie, I didn't know how everything was going to work, so we ended up bringing Bud over to read the lines, because there was a number of scenes where he's talking to the computer, and so Bud became like an actor on the set, but we built a little cubicle for him to do it and run it through a speaker onto the computer. So during the actual filming, Lenny in particular and Virginia could talk to the computer, and little Bud Cort would be talking back from a little cubicle off the side of the stage.
Don't touch.
A few of the technical issues that came up because the film was about the centre of it was about a computer, were technically it's just a bit fiddly to film off a screen, exposure-wise, and technically to lose some flicker and those sort of things. So we did have a few issues. I brought a few people in from our music videos, like the editor David Yardley, who came in and edited all the stuff that went onto the screen. Even though we cut it on film, we'd done quite a lot of assembling on video, which was very unusual at the time. Nobody was editing digital, but we did some of it that way. So really, the technical side of it was the least unusual for me, because I worked through a lot of that stuff in the videos that we'd done. We shot most of it in the UK. We did all the exteriors outside her house in San Francisco. We really established, the world of San Francisco and Alcatraz and everything for that section. But it was only a couple of weeks, and then the other, I'd say 8 or 9 weeks, we shot it in England. I mean, a lot of it took place in the apartment, so we built that apartment. Obviously found the house in San Francisco first, so the windows would be the right shape and everything. We thought, right, this is the exterior, now let's build the interior in the UK, and we didn't use the interior in the US at all. I was really young and naive. 3 years earlier, I was the clapper loader, the T-boy, with a lot of this crew, and the camera crew in particular. And so to suddenly be the boss, still with me long hair and me spotty face, was something that was obviously odd. I kind of got used to it pretty quick, and I'd never felt the pressure of like, now you're leading this $7 million film, and somehow. Now I think back on it, I was 25, 26, running this big budget thing. But I think because of the music videos, I'd kind of run out there and just done it and just not thought about the pressure of, spending that amount of money and calling all the shots. The actual filming of it was all pretty harmonious. It just kind of flew by. It always takes a year to make a movie. It was a fun year with, a lot of adventure and things, and a totally new world for me of discovery. I was discovering about filmmaking as opposed to picture making, I suppose, visual making. I was much more a visualist, so I didn't think in terms of what the impact of different words would be, or dialogue or sound in particular. Audio was a new. When we got in to do the mix of the audio, and we're putting together things, and I'm like, oh my God, we get that sound, and we put that sound. I suppose if I'd have known certain things or had the experience, I might have shot things in a slightly different way, because sometimes, I was telling it all visually, and sometimes you're going to tell it with audio, or you're going to tell it with atmosphere. That's something that's very hard to know unless you I didn't go to film school, I didn't learn that sort of thing. All I did was my film school was T-boy on set, was like nobody telling you anything. You were just watching and observing. And through the cameras, because I was in the camera department, that's what I knew and was comfortable with. But I'd never been in a mixing suite and seen what you could do in surround sound with 120 tracks of sound and layers that can change the tone and story of any scene. That was all fresh and new, and in a way I probably would have done the film a little differently if I'd have gone back straight away armed with that new understanding.
Where begin? First, rhythm.
Flashdance had been out, and Giorgio Moroder had written the soundtrack for that, and it was so strong and connected so well with MTV. He signed on to do the score. Giorgio brought me this demo that he had. He said, I do a lot of demos, and when I find a good tune or a good melody, I just get someone in to sing it with any old words, and it gives me the melody, and I keep it on the shelf. And he said, I've got one that I've done, I really think it's perfect for this movie as the main theme song.
Hello, hello. This is dedicated to the ones I love.
He's played me this song, and it was kind of very poppy, and I felt I was trying to get a little edge to the film, so there'd be nothing too mainstream, too MOR, they called it, middle of the road. And I felt this song sounded more like a Neil Diamond song, maybe because of the singer who was singing the demo on it, and the words he was singing as well might have thrown me into that. But it was basically the tune of Together in Electric Dreams. He said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, yeah, it's really nice. Can we get someone interesting to sing it? And he said, yeah, whoever you want. And I said, well, I've been doing these videos for Human League. I did Don't You Want Me and Love Action and a few of those. And Phil Oakey had this kind of slightly droll, harsh voice that wasn't so melodic and lyrical. And I thought, well, can we use Phil Oakey? And I thought that might at least counteract the melodic side of the song. So he was fine with that. Phil Oakey said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it as a kind of solo thing, but I'll write the lyrics. Phil was very meticulous. They took quite a while to do their album Dare. They spend a long time in the studio, but he came into this and he showed Giorgio the lyrics, and Giorgio said, well, I won't read them. Come in and just sing them into the microphone, and then I'll get a better sense. And so he ran the track, put his headphones on, ran the track for Phil, and Phil, said we'd always be together in electric. Ran the thing to show Giorgio what he'd written on the way there. And he pressed the button to stop it, Giorgio, and said, that's great. That's great. He said, well, Phil said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's it, we got it. He said, no, I was just seeing whether you like the lyrics. And it can't be it. He said, well, we do another one. And they did one more. And he said, that's great.
We'll always be together in electric dreams.
Phil was really shocked that he'd been in the studio for like a moment, and Giorgio was happy and ready to go, and he's, you know, a big record producer, and he wanted to take that, and that was the song. You know, it was one of those things. I think MGM had not had much success over the previous 3 or 4 years, and they were hoping this was going to be the one, and they were really wanting it to be. They put it out in like 1,000 cinemas. They really pushed it, and I think the first weekend, I can't remember what they wanted to get, but we didn't get anything like what they were hoping to get in the opening weekend. And what I then discovered is that, you know, it's all about that opening weekend. That it's what dollars you're going to get in that opening weekend informs everything about the life of that movie, the success or the failure of that movie. And we didn't have a great opening weekend. I remember sitting at the Sunset Marquee in LA just after it had come out with Richard Branson around the pool, and we were sitting there, and this was our Hollywood dream. And I think we were silent for a few minutes, and then Richard said, "Oh well." And that kind of summed it up.
Really, come on, you're going to squash my clarinet.
Put your hands down!
I think then Virgin released it themselves in the UK. I think it did okay in the UK, I seem to remember. I don't know the figures and things. But by then, I'd understood the world of movies, and the world of Hollywood was all about exact dollar figures on a couple of days. And that kind of threw me completely as a director. And I came out of Electric Dreams just wanting to go back to music videos. And I still got offered a few films and things, but I was like, I didn't understand that world. It was too strange that it could be all about that when you put so much into something. The film definitely gave me the tools to do more movies, and to, you know, I learned a lot from it. And actually the second film I did was the opposite, was a massive hit, came from something that nobody wanted to do, that everybody thought was going to be ridiculous and bad, to something that was a massive hit. So I did the exact opposite journey. I suppose, you know, everything informs you. You grow, you learn from your experiences, and Electric Dreams was a particular special experience that I feel I grew and learnt from.
I was in New York doing plays, and I had done a TV movie called Kent State. One thing led to another. I got an audition for Tender Mercies, and that worked out well. It was such a beautiful experience. I couldn't imagine anything better, really. And then I got a call that this man named Rusty Lemarand had seen me in that movie and wanted to talk to me about something called Electric Dreams. We had a meeting for the first time at the Russian Tea Room, and it was he and Kelly McGillis and me. I just remember us getting acquainted, and I spoke about my lack of affinity for anything technological, and he said, that's good, you know, we can use that, you know. I realized at that time that we both went, ding, you know, this is good, you know. We'll be in the same vein as the character.
Oh, damn, I'm late.
Well, hurry then.
And the next thing I knew, there was this young actress from Chicago who was going to play Madeline, and saw her picture, and she was just so lovely.
Oh, I was so brand new. I mean, I did Dune, and that was when I first moved to LA, but this was the big leagues. I mean, this was my first leading role in a movie, so you can imagine the stakes were so high, you know. It was really a great surprise when I got the job. You know, when you're that young, you're very brave, and you kind of don't even know you're brave. You know, I felt immediately at home, because this was my dream. This was where I was supposed to be. This is, you know, what I'd been dreaming of since before I can remember. So, of course, going to the audition, I was extremely well prepared. And then all of a sudden, it was me and Lenny, and we were just both brand new.
Will I see you again?
I think so. We're neighbors.
Steve Barron flew over from London and we met, and at that time, you know, MTV was in its infancy and it was burgeoning, it was big, you know, and he had just done Billie Jean and he was the hot director du jour.
Steve was making these really incredible little movies, and so they gave him an actual movie. So he was, to me, he was like a famous director because everything was MTV, and MTV was actually music then. He was very good technically, and of course they surrounded Steve with the best in the business, and you know, on the entire crew. So it was very exciting for me to be around them because I'd never been on a set for this long, and so, you know, watching them set up cameras and lights, and none of that was a distraction for an actress like me. That was fascinating to watch how things were done. It was the ultimate behind the scenes.
I can't tell you how much I loved it. I took to it with alarming ease, and we had the best, well, it was easy to do because we had the top of the line crews, you know. I mean, I know it's fashionable now to say that we had such a great crew, but we had the A-team, you know, and I didn't know they were the A-team then as much as I do now. I mean, we had Alex Thompson and Peter McDonald and Roy Sharman, just stunning array of people who were all so kind and patient, teaching me this greenhorn, you know, how to carry a movie, and I'll be grateful to them forever.
Oh, not so fast. You just got here.
Pardon me.
And Steve was very good with actors. You know, I think I have a picture of him somewhere where, you know, he's like standing there with me and Lenny as we're having this really emotional scene at the end of the movie in the street, and he was like really just there with us. And so we had the perfect director. Rusty, he was also pretty new, like we all were, and so Rusty was around really every day. You know, he was never sort of shunned from the set. It was a rare time when a writer actually got to stay the writer, you know, all the way through production and editing. And so this meant the world to him. And this was it was as much a part of him as it became for us. And so he got to see his dream come true and got to see this wonderful creation come to life. And what a mind to invent this story so ahead of its time.
Alcatraz, what are we doing going to a prison?
We shot a lot of location stuff in San Francisco. And then after this glorious month there, I think we shot for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because you had a lot more time to shoot a movie back then. And we went from San Francisco and we flew first class to London, and the rest of the time we shot at a little studio in Twickenham in London, and we both had flats, and it was just, everything was so glamorous, and they just treated us so well. You never felt back then that there was any problem with money, or, you know, we weren't staying in an awful hotel somewhere, and they just treated us like gold. I was quite spoiled after I came off this movie, and I sort of let it be known on the next film that I was not happy. Because they really spoiled us. And I was in Mayfair, and I think Lenny was in Chelsea. So he was like in the cool area, and I was in the posh area. And I loved it, you know. I wish that they had put us together, like with him downstairs and me upstairs, but we might have gotten up to no good if that had happened. If I had anything to say about it. It was like a summer love. It was really an affair of the heart. You know, those blue eyes, and he was so romantic, and Lenny was always and is an artist first. So it was as if we really did fall in love. And of course, we never acted on that because you weren't supposed to do that when you were making a movie. But our connection and our chemistry in that film was so strong that he's still one of my great friends all these years later. And I feel like I don't want to start crying, but I feel like I love him. It's a privilege to have him in my life. And it's like so much has happened to both of us, but because we had a connection at such a young age that was so strong, you can never take that away.
It was a crash course for both Virginia and I think, because MGM treated us like these stars, you know, and we were babies. But it was like Outward Bound, because you're sort of thrust into this experience of working every day and doing this movie, and so it bonds you in the same way that Outward Bound does, I think. And that's why we've always been close. We don't see each other for long periods of time, but that was a unique time.
It really was extraordinary, because I believe that you can't act chemistry. You can try, but it's not, somehow the truth of that is on film. And so that connection, even though it was just a sweet, fun love story, the fact that we had this incredible attraction to each other and this incredible chemistry, that I think cemented the story and the film.
Goodbye.
Bye. Next.
Did you kiss to her?
Yes. Next.
Love.
And then Bud Cort, who was Edgar, the voice of our computer, first of all, Bud insisted that the computer had a name. And everyone was kind of like, oh, and I was like, no, he has to have a name. He's a being, you know, he's intelligence now. He's artificial intelligence. So Bud had them build this box, this wooden box. And he would sit in the wooden box, and he had a microphone, and there was a little speaker in the computer. So the scenes between he and Lenny, they actually were talking to each other. And I'm pretty sure that that was Bud's idea. And so, but if I would happen to accidentally run into Bud, he was like, no, you can't see me. And I was like, come here. And he was like, no, you can't, I have to be in the box. And, you know, he was completely immersed in that role.
The interesting thing was, I never met Bud Cort. That was by design, which I foolhardily took to, being the method actor I was at that time. I thought that we should not meet, that, you know, Miles' experience of this inanimate object should be my only reference point, that I shouldn't know Bud, you know, and I knew Bud's work, of course, Harold and Maude. So that was a challenge, and I think one day during that long shoot, into the hallway, the door opened, and it was kind of snowing outside, and there was this kind of Eskimo hooded person waving at me and saying, "Hi, Lenny." And I said, "Hi." And you know, and they got closer and closer, and the hood comes down, and it's Bud. And I said, "We're not supposed to meet, and we're ready for you on set." And I said, and I hugged him, and then I went on, you know.
Relax. It's a local call.
Richard Branson came once and invited Virginia and I to this party on some barge that he'd converted. I chose to not go because I had an early call, and God, that was a mistake. But I did what I did for love, you know.
I finally met Sir Richard Branson several years ago when Virgin Air was doing their first flights direct from Los Angeles to Chicago. And he invited me to be on that flight, I suppose, because it was the first flight and I was in the first movie. And I had a broken leg. Imagine me going down the stairway. And I was remembering when he picked up, you know, Pamela Anderson, and here I was like hobbling down crutches. And I said, you know, would you do it again? Would you make some more movies? Because he was and is a visionary. So I would hope that he would do it again with me.
Hello.
What is it?
Hi. How are you?
Nervous?
I didn't have any musical experience except that I played the piano when I was a child. And the piano is not an instrument that travels well. So as soon as I went to Los Angeles, my days of, much to my mother's dismay, my days of playing the piano were over. And so I think I was able to take to playing the cello quite easily in the beginning. But I wanted to know how to play the cello. Harry Rabinowitz was my teacher. and he would teach me every single day, even on weekends. If I came home late at night, I would practice, 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 because unlike other instruments, you can't fake playing the cello because, first of all, it's right here. You know, it's right in front of you, so you can't have hand doubles, and I didn't want them to do that. I didn't want them to suddenly go in with someone who really knew what they were doing. And so by the time we got to the scenes where I was actually playing and doing the duel with Edgar, I really knew how to play. And of course, they couldn't record my sound because I wasn't good enough for that. But I could really do it, and I could play along with the playback.
Hello?
And yes, I met Giorgio Moroder, and I took him to task, which was not a good thing to do. Brave or stupid, I don't know which, but I was telling him that this music, because now I knew everything about playing the cello, and this music was impossible to play. It's not, I can tell you it's not written for the cello. And he was kind of like, are you kidding me? I was like, really, it's just not possible. I can't believe to this day that I did that. You know, so full of myself because I knew what I was talking about. I hope he doesn't remember that.
Really, come on, you're gonna squash my clarinet.
Put your hand like that!
And so when the scene comes to pass where my cello is broken, this is where I learned a very important lesson as an actor. I spent hours and hours cradling this prop, just crying and crying and crying like the death of my child. And my mother was there and she's cradling me and I'm getting a migraine and crying and crying. And I walk out and I do the scene. And when I saw the film, the only thing there is just me going and walking away. Like 3 seconds of film is me crying, and I spent like 12 hours sobbing. Not necessary. Self-indulgent. Wait till they roll the camera.
Adeline.
I remember walking down Broadway in New York with a friend of mine, and she said, look, there's a poster on the bus stop. And well, enough time has gone by now, I can say this. I didn't particularly care for the publicity they used in this country. And in Europe, it was much better because you could see two people as opposed to this inanimate object, the computer. Yeah, I kind of poo-pooed that when I saw it. The
first time I saw the film, of course, was a year later at the premiere. We had a red carpet and we had scores of paparazzi, and I sat behind Sheena Easton, which was probably so super cool at the time. It was this packed theater. It was the Pantages in Hollywood. And, you know, they made a big fuss over us, and the premiere was a huge success. And I was terribly obnoxious in the audience because anything that was funny, I was the loudest laughter. Oh, it was terrible. But I was so proud and so excited. And we had a big party afterwards. And it was a great success. We had, across the board, incredible reviews. We had Ebert and Siskel gave us 2 thumbs up, such a big deal then. All my friends were going to see this movie. And then the movie was taken out of theaters in 2 weeks. And back then, that was a death sentence for your film, because that's the only place that films could live then. And so it was not considered a success because of that.
Do you want some popcorn?
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing for me. It didn't put me up onto like the top of the casting lists. But for someone so young, it was probably better that it went away, because I had this sort of burst of fame. You know, every magazine, every newspaper, and then it went worldwide, and then it all went away. So I got to take a breath, I got to go on to another job. It's not about that movie, it's about the work. Just keep your eyes on the prize. That's all that it's about, just be professional. So that was a very good lesson for me. I'm fortunate that it happened that way. I really believe so, because I never got ripped apart.
I was with a certain co-star of mine when I was in Chicago doing a movie, and we went to see it. I'd rather not talk about that night because she was a Scorpio and took it upon herself to, well, she wasn't very supportive, you know.
Memory size, unlimited. Everything.
I had heard from someone that I respected very much who had seen it. He reported back to my manager who told me that I was charming and I had much to be proud of. And so I always let that be the reigning thing in the spin doctor in my head. I would think about this great New York actor I admired and try not to torture myself over anything else, you know. I've grown to love it, you know, and because people have such affection for it.
After that, Electric Dreams had a very, very long life on video. And it was like suddenly the #1 movie in every video store, and those exploded and were suddenly everywhere. You could actually go rent or buy, and you could watch movies on your time. You didn't have to go to the theater. And then it had a long life on cable, so it was always the gift that kept on giving. There's something about this film that just makes it live on and on. There's something pure and something sweet and something romantic.
I just loved everything about it. I can't think of anything that didn't charm me and delight me and thrill me.
The experience is an electric dream. It really was, and it still is. You know, obviously I glow when I talk about everything about it, and I'm sure there were difficult things that happened that I just erased from my memory because it was my dream come true.
Hey, that's a big guitar. That ain't no guitar, it's a cello.
You know, I have one last story that I wanted to tell you about. I was making this pilot that never went anywhere. And this was at a time that my career was just tanked. And I was a single mom, and I had this little baby, and I was making this lousy pilot. And I was downtown LA and just trying to get into the spirit of things and carry on. And this extra, this young girl, came up to me and she said, I have to tell you that I watched Electric Dreams when I was a little girl. And I now play the cello with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. That's just like, because that's what I said when I made that movie. If I can have one little girl learn how to play the cello, and that girl came up and thanked me many years later, and it didn't matter that I was doing a crappy job on this show. It didn't matter that my career was so low, because that happened.
Well, I'd always been a little ahead of the pack with computers. I had an early Apple II, first consumer grade home computer. Kind of wasn't sure what to do with it, because if you got it then, you basically had accounting programs and you had ping pong type game programs. And so I spent a lot of time with it, exploring it, learning how to program it, but it was really basic. And simultaneous to that, I was on a bus in Chicago for reasons I don't recall, but I saw a young child playing, was sitting with what apparently would have been his grandmother by her age. And he was deeply involved with an early like Atari game. And I thought, if that had been me in my childhood of that age, I'd be talking to my grandmother, because grandparents are quite cool. They're pretty dedicated to grandchildren. And I thought that was sad, that interaction wasn't human to human. It was a machine had taken over from the grandmother. Like he was holding an electronic grandmother, conversing with that. Of course, little did I know that that would be a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on now with cell phones and lack of communication, not just cross generations, but within the generation. But I thought that that could be interesting, where this new thing called the home computer could take over in a kind of a Frankenstein way. And then I also thought of Cyrano de Bergerac, which I'd always loved as a piece of literature, and that's where the idea of writing love songs came from. So the idea was pretty strong and pretty quick. It was what they call an epiphany. And then I went out and pitched it to various studios and got a deal at Universal, as I said. They got the first draft, which was called Computer Love. That was the original title. You do a lot of rewriting, so a script is never really finished until you've edited the last shot, chosen the last piece of music, finished the last effect, whatever it is. A script is really constantly being rewritten, or I think should be. Milos Forman, the great director, had a famous sentence, which is, the director rewrites the writer, but the editor rewrites the director. It's not always an editor, it's the editing process rewrites the film. So if you have the writer along for the whole ride, then that's can be pretty smooth sailing. I was along because I also produced the film. And the reason why Electric Dreams got into Steve Barron's hands was because the continuity clerk was Zelda Barron, Steve Barron's mother. So I got to know her very well on Yentl. Any picture, you get to know the crew very well because you're with them through such intense situations for so long. And I asked her to read it, and she really liked it. She said, "Oh, my son would love this, and he's about to become a director, a feature director. He's quite well known as a pop promo director." She said, "I'd love to show you his work," and I was very impressed. I mean, you could not be. Steve was a real vanguard in that area. So I could see where Electric Dreams would be a natural fit for him, because in essence it's a musical, and its musical numbers are what we then would call pop promos. So we were getting one of the best guys who did pop promos to also do the rest of the script. And then through Steve, I met Richard Branson, because they were close friends. Steve having done many videos for Virgin Records. So that was a pretty quick process. Branson, of course, one of his reasons for great fame and fortune is that he was ahead of the pack, saw things coming. And as I recall, his company Virgin, he had Virgin Films, Virgin Records, and so the ability to put records from his recording artists into the film and have this so-called synergy of, you know, records and videos and pop promos and hit singles. That was, I think, post Flashdance, there was an attitude that you needed a hit song from an 80s film to sort of go with the hand in hand with the marketing of the film. So this gave the potential for a number of hit singles. And then we had a fantastic distribution deal for MGM. Like I said, you asked, was everybody after the project? Yes and no. Once we had one person interested, then we had multiple offers. Each offer had different terms and conditions. And the MGM deal was the best, we thought, of all the offers. We took it. And basically we were a go picture overnight.
129 for San Francisco. Will passengers...
With these films, there's always two ways to go, and it's obvious. You either go with recognized names, and you pay for that, but you get something for that, because by using recognized names, there's marketing built into it. Audiences, I think, are skeptical of films that have no names in them. When they look at whatever they use nowadays to check their iPad or their phone to see what's playing that weekend, if they don't recognize a few names in the cast, I think they think, it's a B picture, can't be very good, I'll wait till later. So you pay for names. Otherwise, you go with total unknowns. Flashdance was an example. I don't recall anybody in Flashdance who anybody had ever heard of or cared. So when the music is strong, like it was in Flashdance, you tend to say we can break out names, we can establish new talent, and that was our original intention. We had actors contacting us because once a film is a go picture, word gets announced immediately, and you have agents all over you trying to get their clients an audition or a meeting. And that was very flattering, but we didn't even see those people because we decided, no, we're not going to be a 200 peso movie, we're going to be a 100 peso movie, and we're going to cast accordingly. And a film called Tender Mercies had just come out with Lenny Von Dolen, and he was not known, but he was quite known at that moment because of that film. Very popular film, and he was very strong in it. So we had a top casting director, a lady named Wally Nacita, and I was in London at the time. I can still remember the theater I saw it at because the film had a big impact on me. And I called her from outside the theater, and I said, "What do you think of Lenny Von Dolen?" She said, "I think he's great. He'd be wonderful." I said, "Okay, well, let's see what Steve thinks." And we now need to find, if he agrees, I was really like anxious, just move this along, get this done. Since we had elected not to go with recognized names, that was an easy process. If you saw somebody or were excited about them, then you could move very quickly. Wally then called, I'm hesitating because I'm never sure, I don't want to embarrass anybody. Wally then called and said, top agent at the time called and was dying for his client to be met. And she was up for a couple of really big things. And because there's that aspect of casting as well. It was sort of three tiers. There's actors who are known, who you can say, oh, that's the lady from such and such. Actors who have nothing going on, nothing on their resume, and would be initiating a career with a lead in a film, distributed by a major studio. And then there are those actors in between who have been cast in something but it hasn't come out yet. So the jury's still out on them. Are they going to be a big star? Are they going to be a one-hit wonder? Are they going to have no successful films, but they will have been on film? And so this particular actress, who probably I shouldn't name because she didn't do it, but she had two important films about to come out in the interval. And I met with her in New York. I met her and Lenny at the same time in a restaurant in New York. And I thought they were sensational together. So I was like in heaven. It's like, my God, this girl could be famous before our film comes out, which in fact she did become famous. And Lenny seems ideal with her. There was that same quality of being uncomfortable and anxious around this girl of his dreams and not being able to really articulate his feelings. Maybe it was an act. Maybe he was putting on a great act, but it was working very well. So I called Steve from LA or from New York the next day, and I said, well, for what it's worth, I think Wally has found the perfect couple, and I can't wait for you to meet them. He says, great, great, great. So he met them in New York, and he did not have the same reaction. He really liked Lenny. He was sold on Lenny, but he didn't think she was the right girl and wanted to pursue that further. And, they say 80% of directing is casting, so you have to really listen to those directorial instincts and respect them. So, I said, fine, I have others in mind. And that's when we met Virginia, but she was equally delightful. Different entirely, but equally delightful. And of course, Virginia had a couple of films. Maybe she had done Dune. And what made her more important in Dune, besides having this small princess part, was that they had called her in to open the film. There's a huge opening prologue. Nobody understood Dune. So instead of the Star Wars screaming titles over your head, going on and on, they had Virginia in a nice close-up going on and on, telling you about the Spice Wars. And now I think most people would more recognize, this is how careers go up and down. I think more people would recognize Virginia today. They may not go, that's Virginia Madsen, but they go, I know that actress, I've seen that actress, than this other one who didn't get the part. Don't take any of this as being remorseful. It's just what happens. In a film, there's usually many people that have to be pleased in order to make something happen. There are many slots you have to fall through to get through the final passage and get the part. So in the case of Virginia, Wally liked her, I liked her, Steve liked her. To be honest, I don't recall that Richard Branson weighed in. He was a really decent guy to work with. He could have said, okay, I want to see tapes of everyone. He didn't. But to be fair to me, I'm the one that got the distribution deal with MGM. I was able to make that choice. And MGM's distribution deal 100% financed the film. So the film was not a financially risky proposition for Richard. And that has a bit to do with the machinery of how you pre-finance a film, then pre-sell your territories, knowing before a camera's even rolling whether you've recouped your budget, blah, 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 blah. And the film was properly pre-sold so that the budget was covered from day one.
I wanted to be a great ballerina, but my mother said I was too short, so she gave me cello lessons instead. So what about you?
What, architecture?
Lenny probably was more a method actor than Virginia, so he probably needed more talking to and discussion. They both did a very good job. I was personally very pleased. I think Steve was too. I never heard any complaints. I never heard him say, well, we cast wrong or anything like that. But I think his process was a trial and error one that he worked out with them, meaning Steve was learning how to direct actors. But he handled it really well. You wouldn't know if you came on the set just a few weeks into shooting. I don't think you'd say, oh, that director's never directed actors before. He picked it up very quickly. And again, it may have an influence from his mother, who was being, one reason Zelda, his mother, I keep mentioning her, but she became a director, which is rare. Rarely do script continuity people step into that position. But Zelda became famous for the kind of person a director could consult and say, how was my performance? What did you think? Well, particularly if that director was also acting in the film, like Warren Beatty. She was famous for giving Warren advice on his performances and then other people's performances.
I want to meet her.
I was working for John Peters, and Bud Cort was going to be a star in a film they had called Die Laughing, starring Robbie Benson. Bud was to play the comic villain. And Bud had a terrible car accident, which caused need for surgical repair to the top of his head. He claimed it was all fine with his hair, you couldn't see it, but he didn't want anyone to see him. And it was getting closer and closer to the start date of his photography, making everyone on the production anxious, because here they had Bud Cort, which was somebody of importance, someone you would see visually, it wasn't just a voice, and yet they were not sure if they should recast him or not. It was getting tight. I was new to the company, so he had never met me. And I said, well, why don't I pretend to be a flower delivery guy for some flowers, get well soon flowers, and I'll get a hat and a shirt, and then I'll just see. Hopefully he'll answer the door, because I'm just a flower delivery guy. And I can give a report, and that's in fact what we did. And it was fine. The hair covered it. And that's how we met, which I had to tell him, because he was going to meet me on the set. It's like, what's that flower delivery guy doing on the set? Because it preserved his job, I don't think he was angry. If he had lost the job, I don't think he'd ever want to see me again. But we became good friends. So I always wanted to work with him. You know, I'm digressing a bit. It's interesting reading stories how Douglas Rains got the part in 2001 to play Hal, the computer. It was like a one-day gig. They had used, typically what you do is you just have the script lady read those lines if you're going to add them later. And I knew that wasn't going to work. I knew there had to be an actor. And I had to fight for that, because everyone said, no, just get an actor later. A couple of days, you know, ADR. Well, nope, I'm going to put my foot down. I have these powers. I can use them. We're going to hire an actor, and he's going to be on that set every day, working as an actor. And I might have had some good references for that process, but I can't think of them right now. So it was okay, if you say so, and we can afford them. So I had Bud in mind, not just because then I would do my friend a favor, which I always liked doing, but I knew he was first class.
How do you know so many words?
Word processing.
I knew that he had a vocal instrument that made him famous, and that he could do anything with it. So everyone was very happy. I mean, that was like, we finally had a name, and it was like, okay, we're breaking our rule a bit to not have recognizable names in the cast, but it would be, and I think he came up with a special appearance by Bud Cort or something like that, which I kind of said, well, we're lying because there's no appearance by Bud Cort. But okay, if that's what he wants, he can have it. It was Bud's idea to never be seen by the talent, to only be known as a voice from the computer, which again created a few technical obstacles, which meant possible impact on the budget. You never want that. Meaning there'd have to be a booth off the set.
Play it, Sam.
What key?
Your favorite.
You want verses first or the choruses?
We were fortunate that 90% of our settings, interior settings, were that one apartment. So when he wasn't there, we could work around it. But most of the time he was shooting he'd be in that little booth. He'd go there, he wouldn't cross paths with the actors. And it was funny, it was like a prison cell after a while. He had his photos pinned up and his little toys or whatever occupied his mind when he wasn't working.
And those words, I
can't play that for her. I want to squeeze you, lick you, pucker up, and kiss you. You make her sound like a lemon.
But moles, they rhyme.
A general rule of thumb, people may know this, you start with your exteriors in a film, get rid of them first, because then if you have weather problems, you can move indoors. But you don't want to use up your interiors. God forbid, huge mistake would be to shoot all your interiors, have your last few weeks be your exteriors, and have weeks of thunder showers. You are screwed. So no competent production manager will ever schedule a film that way. So all of our exteriors were done first. And many of the exteriors were in England, believe it or not. I enjoyed telling people, no, that was done in England, that was done in England. It's funny how much you have to worry about things like light switches and toilet flushers and outlets, how much our brain knows those things. But we had a top set decorator. That's the man or woman who basically puts the chairs in and the furnishings and all that. He, on every film, if it was an American film, he would make one trip to America just to go to a hardware store. It'd be like going to a Home Depot and buying all the switches and all the toilet pulls, and just one big shopping trip to buy them all. If you had complex set construction, you had great talent in England. I don't think any people felt that the cameramen and the sound, etc., were any better in England, but they did feel that set construction was superior in England. So those films like Batman, Superman, all very set dominant. And it was cheaper then. Labor was cheaper. I don't know that they had subsidies back then. I don't recall any. Subsidies are now the new thing. Back then it was just simply, where's the cheaper labor cost? And a film really is like a camp of gypsies, moving fast and making snap decisions. Because that camp of gypsies, they each have a little meter running, like a taxi. So much per hour they cost you. And so you better get the shots that day that you need and the pages shot and get through the schedule on schedule or you're in trouble. So there's nothing like having the pros.
Attention, sports fans.
Well, I'd love to say we were trying all kinds of experimental things, but it was really a safe shoot in a sense. It was basically a couple of actors in a big old apartment, occasionally going out into the community and having conversations that involved more than two people. Of course, you could call it a love triangle in a sense. The thing that was the most challenging had to do with the computer graphics, because of course we knew that this was not a robot. This thing did not have arms and a head and eyeballs that could move. So the face was going to be static except for what was projected on it. And again, today, anyone could do this stuff with a laptop computer and software you can get free off the internet. But just like when they made 2001, all the computer-controlled spaceships were basically 16 millimeter film that they shot as simple animation and then projected with little 16 millimeter projectors behind screens. We didn't project onto a screen, but we'd have to build those animations. And we didn't anticipate how long it would take because in many cases it was frame by frame. I mean, if anyone bothered to look at the animations for example, there's the gimmick in the film where the architectural character played by Lenny has his dream project of a earthquake-proof brick. He's convinced, like a jigsaw puzzle, you could design a brick that would be somewhat movable in an earthquake and still retain its position in space once the earthquake subsided. So he plays with the jigsaw puzzle and he plays with that concept, and then that was the gimmick I had as to how you could go from the math of architecture, of three-dimensional space, to the math of music, that they're both ultimately mathematical and they follow mathematical rules and one can be displaced for the other. Turns out there's a little bit of science in that I didn't know at the time. Well, how do you portray that on film? You have to come up with a visual concept. So during the period we were shooting in San Francisco, when we were on location, there was no need for any graphics. But we met a guy there named Tim Boxell, who had been working with MTV on their so-called interstitials. MTV was famous that between videos, they wouldn't just have a logo, it'd have a slightly animated logo, would do something funky. And Tim was part of that process. And basically, Tim and I would go at night to a place called Rush's, which was on Water Street, which is where Steve had edited many of his videos, so there was a really good relationship there. We got a very good rate. We were paying, but it was a really good, after-hours rate. And there was one editor in particular, his name was David Yardley, who was very clever with just doing stuff. So many of what effects Steve had accomplished were because of David Yardley's cleverness, where literally there'd be like a static camera where you could shoot title cards, but we do limited stop frame by frame animations, or you could move things around with a joystick. So all the graphics that the computer created were basically done that night, the night before shooting, and we would literally take a taxi in from Water Street, having finished our night work. We felt like night elves. We had done our sewing. We delivered the tape to the video guy who would play it back on set to confirm it was good. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't, because we didn't have a backup to our plan. And then go sleep, because we'd been up all night. I think it helped Steve that it got me off the set. And, you know, tremendous credit has to be given to Tim Boxell and Dave Yardley for co-creating those effects. And I'll take a little bit of credit for it. I used to be a graphic artist, so I wasn't, you know, unfamiliar in that world. I think the results were strong. Certainly in its time frame, were very strong.
She made me feel.
That's
like
it. She made you feel. That's good. That's perfect. That's
love.
I'm trying to think if there was any real animation in the whole thing. There may have been one thing where a 3D head rotated in space. There was a company called Digital Effects, and it was John Whitney Jr. John Whitney Sr. was responsible for slit scan photography. John Whitney Jr. created a company, and they had the first Cray computer. Anybody into computers will be curious about Cray computers. And the first big shot they ever did was creating Jupiter in 2010, which had to be done by computer animation. And the first film they did was called Last Starfighters, which was famous for creating not-minute models that move through space, controlled by motion control cameras, but literally computer-generated spaceships. So I think we had one authentically computer-generated shot in the course of the 90 minutes of the film. For the last shot in the film, where the computer self-destructs, we went to a traditional effects house and made a contract with them to do that last shot. So it looked like there was some special effect-y explosion. It wasn't just an explosion. We, you know, had people on set who could create explosions, but it had to look like a magical computer explosion. I had a good relationship with Giorgio Moroder, who was quite a successful songwriter, composer, producer of that era. And Giorgio had already kind of was a little frustrated I hadn't brought it to him directly, so he had more control, but still happy that it was around because then he could exercise his skills. And he, of course, wrote probably the most successful single from the film. We'll always be together, together in electric dreams. And Giorgio did the score, which was very important because that was the beginning of the end of the film composer as melody writer. George used to say the great film composers all wrote theme songs without calling them theme songs. The theme from Gone with the Wind could be a record. The theme from Dr. Zhivago, the theme from Exodus, I mean, you name it.
What?
song. S-O-N.
N-G. I spell.
Okay, so try it.
What is it?
When I put the script together, because it was, in my mind, a musical, true musical, there was a book and then there were songs, and then those songs would be illustrated by visuals. I put together a demo tape of existing material that I liked a lot and I thought would be really ideal as examples for whoever would finally do the music. And I found more often than not I was going to ELO as my reference, Jeff Lynne and ELO. And so I thought, well, what a great starting point to get Jeff Lynne to do some songs for the film. Now, he was famous for being hard to reach. He was so big in his field. And he had done Xanadu, and apparently that did not go as he had planned, although Xanadu was a huge success musically. Later became a hit Broadway musical. So he had nothing to be ashamed about. I mean, the film is important in film history, and it's lived on. But I finally did get a phone number for him. I just talked to him, just spoke to him, told him what I was up to, what I had done. I had some credentials by that point, and described the piece. And I think just in describing it, it sounded like something that he'd be intrigued by. So he agreed to read the script. And he called back and said, I really like it. I'd like to do as many songs as you'd like me to do. And I was a little taken aback because that was like almost too good. And I was wondering, am I making a mistake here? Not having one artist do all the songs. But I, realized, well, we're in bed with Virgin, and they've got Boy George, and they've got Phil Oakey. So I said two, which other than Giorgio, I don't think anyone contributed more than 2 songs. And he did his 2 songs quickly. The songs are wonderful. And Steve was very happy, and I was very happy. And it was good to have them so quickly because then it meant we needed to shoot them to track in the film. Visual images had to be prepared to be shot. So the song Video, for example, takes place on Alcatraz Island, but there are many film clips that the computer uses to come up with its concepts for the song. It was like a fake idea that the computer uses commercials to be inspired musically, to then create something actually good musically, quite good musically.
The satellites that search the night. What are you doing? Stop!
And then the other song, again, had to have film clips prepared for shooting because it's where the computer lonely gives himself a party, disturbing the neighbors who are quite surprised to see it's a party of 0 participants.
Yeah, well, put your coats over there. It's horrible.
Boy George and Culture Club wrote technically 3 songs, although it seems like 2. They wrote Love is Love, and then they wrote The Dream. And then they wanted to write a 3rd song, but we kind of had our rule that nobody was going to do more than 2 songs. So they decided they could write the 3rd song, but it had to be sung by someone else. And there was a singer at the time quite popular in England named P.P. Arnold, because she was starring in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Starlight Express. And so she sang the actual title song of Electric Dreams. That was written by Culture Club. George came to the set at least once, maybe twice, but he was a real fan of Bud Cort's. So that was his impetus. I remember when he called me one night, we were still working. He said, okay, I've got one of your songs. Can I come and play it for you? And I said, great. And we had prepared a proper listening area. He said, no, just you. And I want to play it in my car for you. He had a driver. He wasn't driving. So I heard that song. He's in the front seat, and I'm in the back seat. And he's playing the song. And, he was a huge megastar then. I've seen a lot. I've worked with Michael Jackson, Barbra Streisand, Madonna. I've never seen anyone create the stir that Boy George could create. So I kind of understood why he didn't want to get out of that car any more than he had to. But I can still see him he was kind of like a shy guy, peeking up his little head from the, what would you call it, the riser on the back of the front seat, the head riser, peeking and looking and kind of mouthing the lyrics, lip syncing, all for my benefit. I was like an audience of one. I thought, oh my God, I'm getting a concert from Boy George. And the songs are very good. We couldn't have been happier. And, but he did not come during the shooting of those songs. He just came he really did want to meet Bud Cort. That was a passion of his. And so then Bud, who was a very ceremonial type of person and a very, sociable guy, said, well, we'll all have lunch at my hotel. He was staying at a nice hotel. And so there was a lunch date for Boy George, and Ringo Starr showed up, and Kathleen Kennedy, the famous producer, and Frank Marshall, who were friends of Bud's. And we had the nicest lunch, and George could not have been more sociable.
Love is nothing without you.
I was lucky. I got to write the lyrics to one song, and then was it Helen Terry? She was the lead female singer for Culture Club. Incredible voice. Whenever they needed a female belter, that was Helen Terry. And so Richard Branson wanted to give her a solo career. And so she got to sing a solo on the Electric Dreams album called Now You're Mine, and it was written by Giorgio, and I got to write the lyric for it. Well, a terrible thing happened. Whenever you do a film like this and you work hard to have a soundtrack album, the whole point is to have a structured release pattern of singles, which at that time was pretty formulaic. You could almost set your calendar to it. If your release date was going to be July 1st, that weekend, you'd want to release your first single, say 12 weeks prior to that, so that if it did work, if the single was any good, it could start climbing the charts and reach its pinnacle prior to the release, synchronicity, that the release of the song and the release of the film was properly timed. So the plan was that Video, the Jeff Lynne song, would be the first single released, and then it would be followed by Love Is Love, which was this amazing Culture Club song. And I was kind of tracking both the UK market and the US market because I could. I was back and forth. There were channels that would play the current hits, and I kept waiting to hear Video played in the States. We were well enough before the opening of the film. And by the time I finally thought, there's a problem here. It's a really good song. It's not being played or heard, and was doing well in the UK. I mean, that was on track. And I called Richard Branson, and he was always honest with me, and he said, well, I have some bad news. He said, there's a huge battle going on between us and Walter Yetnikoff, who was the head of CBS Records at the time. And Culture Club was a huge recording artist for CBS Records. Virgin was trying to start a label in America. It did not have its own label. And Culture Club was the scapegoat, the fighting dummy, whatever was what was at issue. And Walter Yetnikoff famously said, I will not let Branson take my stars, Culture Club being one, and if he tries to open an airline in the United States, I'll have it shot down. He was a feisty guy, famous. And he said, so there was a blanket boycott by CBS of all Virgin product in America. And that's why it had not been released. And I got angry. I said, you're kidding me. I mean, how many weeks away are we? And you're telling me this now? Well, I didn't want to upset you. I said, well, you should upset me because I think I can do something about that. I know Walter very well because of Yentl, which was a CBS record, and because Barbara and Walter were so close because of all the time they'd spent in growing their own careers. I knew Walter from all kinds of social encounters. And I was sure he would take my call, and I'm sure he would commiserate with me, and he would repair this. And sure enough, my certainty was well-founded. I got off the phone with Richard Branson, nervously called Walter Yetnikoff. Hey, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. What's going on? I said, do you know the film Electric Dreams? Oh, yes. Do you know the songs by Culture Club and the album in the States? He says, yes. That's ours if we ever want it to be, but we blocked it. And I said, well, you have to release that block. It's my film. He said, oh my God, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I never would have done it if I know it was your film. I'll release the block on that album, which he did. And Branson was stunned. How did you do it? I said, well, just because I have a good relationship with him. And I guess he wanted to be nice to me. But you should have told me this, 2 months ago. It was released, this hold, but it wasn't in enough time. That was problem one. So there was no music support for the film. And that was the whole point of going through all this, was to have this musical package released in its own in its own universe, which cross-synchronizes with the film universe. The film did not open well the first weekend, which you could say, if you want to be a consequentialist, you could say, well, because the music didn't perform, there was nothing supporting the film. MGM was furious, because they felt that that's one thing Richard had promised them in making their deal. And I was feeling bad. It was after the first weekend's release, and typically in Hollywood, more so now than back then, you calculate your box office based on that first weekend. There's almost nothing you can do. You just put all your ad spending prior to that first weekend. And then you spend money to maintain your audience. You don't put a lot more in after the opening weekend. I got a call from Hawaii from a famous producer named Alan Carr, who was beloved and well-known then. He later had his own fall from grace when he produced the Academy Awards, and it didn't go well. And he used, without permission, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from the Disney film and their song. And the Academy turned against him. It was a fiasco. But he was beloved and considered a really successful producer because he before had seen films that he really liked and then got behind them, advised on their distribution, and created hits out of films that were not perceived as hits. Deer Hunter was one of them. Tommy, the movie, was another. He said, I can't believe it. I love this film. And there was no one in the audience. I said, well, you know marketing or lack of marketing. And I told him the story about the album. He said, well, that's a terrible shame. He said, here's what I'd like to do. They know me very well at MGM. I'd like to ask them to immediately pull the film, which nobody ever does. If a film doesn't succeed the first weekend, they let it play out. They might try to see if there's any kind of uptick, but basically that's the end of it. He said this, so theater owners will be shocked that the film is being taken away from them. What I will do then is work with Branson, work with CBS Records to create the musical phenomena that should be created, and then we will re-release the film with proper advertising, proper marketing, etc. He's basically saying, I know how to do this, you don't, but I will do this because that's how much I love this movie. I said, well, great, he said, I'm back this week, let's go meet Frank Yablans, the head of MGM, right away. We met with Frank right away, and he said, it's unconventional, but I'll do it. So basically, it's sort of like an abortion process. We're saying, I'm not sure about this baby, but let's remove it from the womb, put it on life support, and then put it back in the womb and give it a proper birth. The problem was, none of us knew it, saw it coming. Frank didn't see it coming. So he correctly excised it from theaters, and people literally are saying, where was this film? I heard about it, I wanted to see it. These are theaters that did have an audience, theaters that didn't. And we said, don't worry, it's coming back. It's going to be re-released in the fall. It was going to be like a 2 or 3 month holding period. And then a couple weeks later, Frank got fired from the studio. That was the end of it. No new management was going to re-release a film that already had its trial in cinemas, no matter what the explanations were, no matter how grounded they might be. That was the end of it. And so the film today would go to Amazon or Netflix or something. It didn't. So the way that most people in the States saw the film, and by the way, to this day I regret either that Frank obviously that he got fired because it killed that film and killed the space film that was going to follow it by his being fired, but that Alan didn't keep his mouth shut and not bothered me, because I have a feeling it could have, by word of mouth, sustained itself in the theaters and developed a following. Because it certainly did, once it went to HBO, which it did within a certain period of time, it became very popular on HBO. Once people had access to it and talked about it, and it's all about word of mouth. Whatever they tell you, if a film works, eventually it gets an audience. And I had that experience with Caddyshack. I was executive producer on Caddyshack, technically executive in charge of production. The film did not open well, but the theaters didn't have anything planned, so they didn't yank it. It just stays there and dies its own death. But then slowly it started building. And suddenly it was playing well in theaters, but it took a while for word of mouth to work when the advertising did not. So, for all I know, if Electric Dreams had not been yanked, and it was a true yank, I mean, literally the theaters are told, you cannot show this anymore, you have to return the prints. I always had this thought that it could have played well, because it played very well in certain foreign territories. It was a huge hit in France, for example. It was a huge darling at the Cannes Film Festival, and there was critical excitement for the film. But if you just literally take it out of the theaters, there's no way people could have access, because there was nothing then like there is now. There was no YouTube, there was no, VOD, video on demand. Its only little life support for having an audience was HBO. So I feel personally very grateful. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very grateful that there's that kind of curiosity about the film. Everything in the film that turned out to be true, I'm delighted with. Any kind of prediction it predicts the internet, in a sense. The last scene is basically the internet. And the bittersweet ending is that the computer lives forever on the internet, or Electric Dreams, whatever you want to call it.